Hey Noah, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing well. Have a bit of a cold, maybe COVID, but otherwise doing just fine.
Oh man, well, that sucks to hear. Get well soon. But I have a question for you, something that I just read recently, and I think it really relates to the kind of work that we do here at Zuva. I just heard or read on the news that the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, is looking to propose a new rule that would ban employers from imposing non-compete clauses on their employees. Could you tell me more about that and like what are the implications for that?
Well, good question. I've seen this too. So a non-compete clause, there's non-competes in like commercial contracts, like you might have a non-compete between one company and another company not to compete. But one of the spots where they're most common is in employment agreements. And what a non-compete clause says is you can't work for a competing company. So, for example, like you're working on the line at McDonald's and you can't work for like Burger King or Wendy's or Arby's or Sonic or maybe even Shake Shack and stuff like that. And you might laugh at that and be like, oh, that's kind of an outrageous example. Noah, like who would ever put that on a fast food worker? But actually, non-compete clauses are in about 20% from what I've read of uh, employment contracts in the US. And there have been instances of people using them against like hourly low wage workers at things like fast food chains, which is kind of crazy. Anyways, if you would like to read some more about what non-compete clauses are, we got some writing on it. We also have a nice video. So if you just click right here, it'll take you to the writing that we have on it. And even right there, there's a thing that'll allow you to put a contract in and automatically find if it has a non-compete clause in it. So you won't have to read the whole thing and interpret or stuff like that. Like it's not a lawyer, but it can do that stuff and pull it out for you automatically. So that might be kind of cool if you feel like figuring out whether you have a non-compete clause, which I could probably tell you too. But there's places that have done this. California, non-competes tend not to hold up. Massachusetts, I think they tend not to hold up. And Ontario, where we live, recently sort of did away with non-compete clauses. Non-competes, employers like non-competes because, well, number one, like they could restrict your best people from going to, or any of your people from going to competitors, and maybe that's hurting competitors. But I think as an employer, the way that I think about it is there's two things that are really, really, really important to you as an employer that you wouldn't like to have happen, which is that your sort of trade secret confidential information goes to your competitors, like things you know about, like which customers are good customers and how much they pay and how you sell to them and like all the things you learn over the course of doing a business. You wouldn't like that information to go to your competitors, number one. And number two, you wouldn't like people to go to your competitors to steal your other employees or to steal your customers, right? Like those two things, I think, are things that employers would like to protect. And there are other contract clauses to do that, like the theory goes. So, in terms of protecting confidential information, like it's pretty, any contract that's going to have a non compete in it is also going to have something called confidentiality in it. And so confidentiality will say that like you're not, or non-disclosure will say that you're not allowed to share information with other people. I think we probably have a video on that too. And the other one is non-solicitation. So non-solicitation means there's different forms of non-solicitation. One of them is like an employee non-solicit. Another one's a customer non-solicit, and it'll say that like you can't take your employees or your customers from this competitor or from you. Um, if you go to a different job. And so I think the perspective of the FTC is that those clauses should be enough. My experience is that there are a decent number of people that you hire that, and I've seen this like both for and against us, where there are a decent number of employees where they don't rigorously adhere to confidentiality and non-solicitation. Like employees will tell you things about their previous employer that they shouldn't, that like you wouldn't ask them to tell you, that like you wouldn't necessarily like information you wouldn't like to have. And the same thing with non-solicitation. Like you have employees who go and get customers. You have employees who go and take teammates, and they do it to you, they do it for you, and like they skirt the line so that maybe it'd be hard to go after them. Um, no one feels like suing anyone, and so the easiest thing from an employer's perspective is just to have a non-compete, which is like if you prevent people from going to a certain set of competitors, it means that like the risk of confidential information leakage is just a lot less. Like if someone went from your company to a company in a whole different industry, you don't necessarily care if they know how you sold to customers. But if they go to one of your direct competitors, like you really do. And so that's why employers like non-competes, and they tend to put them in. At the same time, non-competes definitely restrict mobility, right? Like you as an employee build up a whole expertise in an area. And if you can't easily go to a competitor, it means you may need to shift industries to get your next job. And that may set you back and it may really hurt you. So the theory is by getting rid of non-competes, you create sort of a more fluid labor market and salaries go up, right? Like salaries are being artificially held down in the FTC's theory by these non-competes and sort of the restrictions on labor mobility. I think there's a lot of studies on that stuff, so I'm not going to say whether that's true or false. This would be a big change. Certainly, it would be very problematic for a lot of employers. Like I said, about, from what I've read, 20% of employment contracts in the US contain a non-compete. So just having to sort of figure out what those say and modify them would be a big deal, let alone the kind of change in business practices. Can't talk too much about the change in business practices. Like, businesses will deal, life goes on. There's places that don't have non-competes. And like California, for example, it's very hard to have a non-compete stand up. And California has a really vibrant economy. So life does, including in lots of companies in competitive sectors. So it's not like life can't go on after non-competes. In terms of just like the practicalities of this, though, it's a very big deal. So one kind of quirk is there are instances where if a court finds sort of one bad thing in an employment contract that's sort of against law, sometimes they do, and not always, but like there are instances where sometimes they throw out the entire contract and just kind of like make it up from scratch. And if you're an employer, generally the court's like, you would not like that to have happen because it's unpredictable and the court might not sort of do things in your favor. So one of the things that an employer will try to do is there'll be something in a contract called a severability clause that'll say if one provision is found invalid, the rest of the contract remains valid. Nonetheless, I think the kind of best practice is going to be to modify your contracts to sort of pull out the non-compete language and maybe replace it with something else, like, or not, just take it out completely. So if you're going to do that, what you need to do as an employer is, in the US, a lot of employees are at will, which means they don't actually have so much employment contracts, but generally they'll have signed something else like a confidentiality and IP agreement. And that confidentiality and IP agreement will have things like non-compete, non-solicit, and confidentiality that we talked about earlier. And so employers could have a whole ton of these. And what they should be doing is, especially if this thing goes through, depending on like what the timing of it is, they're going to need to go through all those agreements and figure out what they say about non-compete and figure out what they say about something called amendment, which is how you change the contract, like what procedure is necessary. You might think that'd be really easy because everybody at the company would be on the same contract, but that tends not to be the case. Like people will have joined through acquisitions and have an old contract from that. People will have joined over the years and employment contracts shift, and companies don't necessarily go back and put everybody on the same form and get them to re-sign stuff because sometimes like you might have to give them like a raise to do that or other changes. And it's just administratively a lot of work. And lots of reasons companies don't do that. So people could be on lots of different employment, these sort of confidentiality and IP agreements. And so what companies are going to be in a big rush to do if this FTC proposal becomes law and survives a court challenge. So someone will probably sue pretty quickly to say the FTC doesn't have the authority to do that, and that could take years. And we'll see if they get like an injunction against it. So it may take a couple of years to kick in, or if it applies immediately and then gets gotten rid of later. Like, there are many different ways that could play out. But in general, like if this thing goes through, which is probably like, I think this first came out about 30 days ago. So 60 days, like 2 months, talking like March-ish. We should get some more details. March, April, May, June, somewhere around there, we'll get some more details. And what companies may need to do is search through all their employment contracts and figure out if they have non-competes in them and what the specific non-competes say and what the contracts say about amendment. It can be a fair bit of work. Like, you really do need to do the work here and figure out if the contracts have this and how to amend them specifically, because the amendment's not going to be the same and necessarily, or might not be the same in every one. And so you're going to feel like going through. It's pretty time consuming and is going to be not too much fun for HR or administrative teams who have to do this. One thing you might check out in that case is, first of all, just make sure you understand what non-compete and amendment are. Like, obviously, read up and figure out if this is changing and if you need to change it. Like, if it's not changing, then maybe you don't need to change it. That's okay. But if it is changing and you figure that out, the third thing you should do is actually start to review your contracts to figure out what they say. One good sort of self-interested thing that you might check out there is software that can help you automatically find non-compete clauses. It's possible with artificial intelligence to do that, and it can save you a lot of time and actually increase your accuracy. If you were going to do it, check out the Zuva website, where we have a free non-compete checker, and you can just run your contracts through one at a time and find out what they say about non-compete. There's obviously some more efficient ways to do it. If you got to do bulk stuff, like, you can pay, but if you just are doing it one-off, or you're willing to do it one-off, go there. It's free. Check it out. See if it works for you. And if it does, then you'll save yourself a bunch of time. Anyways, big change. As an employer, I don't know that I'm like, I think non-competes have real value, but I also get why they're misused in some situations, and I think life will go on if they go away. That makes sense?
Makes a bunch of sense. Thanks, Noah. I think our audience is going to love this.
Let us know.
Thank you. Peace out.